people's houses look like, and what materials were they made out of?
How far back?
As far back as you want to go.
Well, the Shastas built the houses was on a rectangle, and they had a crawl hole in one end, and they were recessed in the ground, so it just part of it stuck out, and they were double walled, and they kept their food in between the walls in the house, and then the small hole was so they crawled in so the bear animals wouldn't get in, and they were made out of
grizzly bear.
Yeah, grizzly bear. They were made out of split plank, and they split them with elk horn. They split the logs with elk horn, and then the roof was cedar bark.
You mentioned grizzlies.
Yeah.
So there is history of grizzlies in this area.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yes.
I got a good story on grizzlies. Okay.
Oh, let's hear it.
Oh, good. Let's hear it. Okay, right down here on Quartz Valley Road, when you come to the tree farm road, where you go up, you have to go up Shackelford, that long straight stretch. Well, right there grows a lot of yellow bells. Used to be a lot of yellow bells growing in there. The first little flower blooms in the spring. They grow just not very tall, you know. But we used to pick them when we were kids. There were a lot in there. Well, the bulb is edible, and it's a good food. So the Indian women were gathering yellow bulbs in that vicinity, and they were attacked by a grizzly bear. This is way back, and I think they killed some of the women. One, two, I don't know. But anyway, so the Indians decided they were going to have to kill this grizzly bear. So the Indian men got together and all got up there in a group, and they found a tree, one of the good tree, and the fastest runner they knew ran that could run the fastest. And so they checked out this tree, and they said he'd test the limbs on it, see, because he was going to run and jump to that tree. Checked it out. So and then they hid along a path, like, with their arrows all along this, kind of like a gauntlet would be. Then this Indian gets out there, and they see the grizzly coming in, so he shoots at this grizzly or gets the grizzly to chase him. And then in the meantime, he had planted arrows here and there all the way up this area. And as he was running, he'd dash sideways, and as the bear go by him, he'd grab that arrow and he'd shoot him. And then he'd run again, and the bear, then he'd get the next one as hit. And that's what they were doing while he was running toward this tree. And meantime, the Indians were hidden on the sides. They were shooting the bear too. And so he gets through this tree, and the bear's still coming real close, and he jumps for this, grabs this limb to get up the tree, and the limb broke. And he fell back down right into the bear's arms. But the bear dropped over dead too, right then. And this Indian man jumped up, said he hollered on that, and when he bit the bear's ear. I said, I don't know why he did that. But that's a very true story. That would happen probably long before white man ever got here.
Well, when
Jenny Wicks's son told me that.
That's a great story.
You tell them the best story up at Parker Ranch.
Well, you tell him that one.
No, I want to tell him mine and Linda's story down the same place.
Same place, all right.
We're going to ride our bikes back from Grandma and Grandpa's. It's only about 4 miles, and we wanted Mom to take the dog. She goes, no, you never know when you're going to need the dog. So she drives off, and we're mad at her. She wouldn't take the dog, so we're going to take our sweet time getting home. And we stopped at that same place right by Shackelford, my older sister Linda and I. We're picking Shasta daisies and wild lilacs. And the dog started barking, and I kept picking him, and Linda says, there's a bear, and I go, oh, shut up. She yanked me out of that ditch so fast, and I turned around, and there was the biggest bear I had ever seen in my life, standing on its hind legs, pawing in the air, because the dog was harassing it. So we get on our bikes, and I'm running faster, pushing my bike, and my sister is riding hers. She had to tell me to get on my bike. And the dog would run and nip at our heels to get us to pedal faster, and then he would run and bark at the bear to slow the bear down. And when we went around the corner, coming this way to come across the valley, the bear was still coming. And when we got home, I think it was about a half hour before my sister said bear. So my mom knew we got chased by the bear. But Dad and Grandpa went down there and they measured the footprints. And Grandpa swore it was a grizzly.
He said it was about the hugest track he'd ever seen.
And Grandpa hunted bears for a long
No,
time.
he's a hunter.
But I used to think it was just my imagination that the bear was so big. But what I remembered is that it was gray. It was not black, brown, or cinnamon. It was gray. I can still see it. It was amazing.
Story in the same place.
In the same spot.
place. Yeah.
Watch out for your kids down there.
Well, my kids in Wairega.
Should they ever decide to go down that way?
Yeah.
Roy, did you have a story you wanted to tell?
No, I was going to have her tell the story of the
Well, you can tell it better than I can.
Callahan up in Parker. You can tell her.
I don't know it that well.
Yeah, you do.
Tell it, Dad.
I don't remember who all was in it, but I think they wanted. They were having bear trouble up there with the bears. The grizzly was after the pigs, so they wanted somebody to shoot the grizzly bear. So I think it was her uncle, wasn't it? Your uncle?
Charlie Wicks.
Charlie Wicks went up there, and he took the guy's son with him, and they were going to get up on top of this haystack next to where the pigs were, and wait for the grizzly to come in. And in the middle of the night, why, they heard the pigs squeal, and they figured the grizzly came in there, and this kid got excited, and he shot down off that haystack. But them old muzzleloaders, had that black powder, and that big flare of fire came out there, set the haystack on fire. And here they were on top of this haystack, and the grizzly was down, so they slid off the other side, and they run to the house. And he said, her uncle got there first, and he just jumped on the porch, and just slid in the house. And he heard this kid was coming behind him, heard him go, and he thought, well, the bear got him. What he did, he run into one of them oak trees that was standing out in the yard. The grizzly wasn't chasing him, maybe.
Now, what year would that have been, Roy? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I have no idea what year that would have been. It must have been about... probably about
1870s, 80s maybe?
60, well, yeah, 70 probably.
Probably
Yeah.
70s or 1870s or 1880s, yeah.
Okay.
That was on the old Parker Ranch.
Yeah.
What were the main food eaten?
Deer meat and the
Salmon.
fish was the main food. Acorns. And then they gathered the apos, which was a plant, a bulb, and the bulb of the camas. They were the real good food they gathered. And then they would roast them in pits, like the earthen pits. Then they could store them. And they could be pounded up in flour, like that they made kind of cakes out of it. They made their pemmican, which was, like fruit leather. With they would mix in berries and whatnot in with this dried meat like that. They made that for their food. And they gathered plants, when everything was in season. That's when they gathered things. So it was a constant. That was one of the main duties of a chief in a vicinity, was to see to it, arrange that the food was gathered, and that everyone had enough food, stored for the winter. And the first kill, like if a young boy first started hunting, and first deer he got, he never ate any of it. It was given to the elderly. Mhm. They were looked after first. They got the tenderest cuts of meat that they would be easiest for them to eat.
What plants along the river were used by the Shasta and Indians, and what were they used for?
There's lots of the willows, were used for their basket making, a lot of implements and tools and things they had. I don't know, there's the wild rhubarb, they call it, which is grows along the river, was used as a food. The wild blackcaps grew along the streams, and that was gathered. Blackberries,
Cattails.
yes, cattails. All the tubers, the white part of that is a very good food, very nutritious.
Tulies?
Hmm?
Tulies?
Yeah, that's what we was talking about, cattails, tulies, same thing.
Well, some of the Indians made mats out of the tulies.
Mm-hmm.
They made shoes and they made duck decoys.
Made
Stuff out
their
of the
boats
tulies.
out of tulies.
Yeah. Wild rice?
Mm-hmm.
Was that in this area?
Mm-hmm.
More over by the Klamath Basin or right
No,
here?
here.
Right here in Scott Valley?
Yeah, where it was real swampy. Wild rice would grow. I know in Shasta Valley it was all over the place out there in the swampy areas.
Gooseberries, some plants. They was a very good one. Then they have the elderberries.
Mm-hmm.
What plants were used for baskets, and what plants are still found along the river that are used for baskets?
The light willow, and they used, like she's talking about, the bear grass was used, and pine root was used, and hazel bushes.
Tulies made tule baskets.
Mm-hmm. I know those plants are all used, and the ferns are the basket materials,
Red bud,
and the redbud.
ceanothus.
Mm-hmm.
That's wild lilac.
What different activities took place in the village, and in what times of the year?
Well, they did their harvesting and their hunting according to, different seasons when things were more plentiful. And they also, like they had their permanent villages here in the valley, but in the winter, in the summertime, they pretty much lived up in the mountains, like in the Big Meadows area, for instance. And there they gathered and hunted and fished, because then they could store it, dry it, then they'd bring it back down to the valley. Because, the deer go back up, summer, and they can still fish the lakes. And then they'd pack down their food later, come down. I imagine they went back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
But the elderly would probably stay in the village, or some that couldn't go, and they probably kept the smaller children. That's where they worked with their implements and tools. And that's when that's the way it was. The community function is, grandparents took care of the children because the people were out gathering, they had to get their food. That was their work. It was hard work. You go dig a few of those epaws out, and you just look at this little that you got here, and you start thinking what it took, to store that much food. But it was work, but yet must have been fun.
How did they make sure that they didn't take too many of any one particular thing?
Pick a post, take a step, pick another one, take a step. It thinned it out, and it also made them grow more. They had more room to grow, and it spaced out the thinning.
Just like when you gather, I get disturbed, and I gather a lot of herbs and plants, and like Princess Pine, there's a little patch I like to get it. You can get to in the wintertime pretty much, so if the snow goes back, sometime I was real anxious to get some. But a little patch just big as this, I could probably use forever. because you prune it. It's like a little bush, you can prune it. Mary and I went up in the fall one year and got some, and just kind of pruned those little plants and got what I needed for the winter. Went back in the spring again, and just coming up through the snow was all this new growth coming, from where we had pruned it before. But I've seen there's some people around here who gather a lot of that princess pine, and they just comes out by the roots. It's in the easy to pull, and then it's just gone. There aren't the patches of it, big patches of it like there used to be at all. And
What would you use that
arthritis,
for? Make a tea out of it.
tea. Yeah. But that's the difference of. That's how the Indians gathered things. They pruned it. They worked with. They talked to the plant, and told them what they were using it for, and they thanked the plant for it. They blessed it because that's their livelihood. So. So that's how they, like you said, they took care of the land. And just like in the fall when they set the fires and let them burn, in the fall in the mountains to burn out the brush areas and keep the area clean so they could, could move freely through there. And it made more feed for the animals, and it was just good for the land.
Do you have an idea of when they stopped doing that burning, the Indian people?
They never did until they were forced by the Forest Service. Because after the Indians, the ranchers going into the mountains to gather their cattle out of the range would light every pack rat nest on fire. And finally they said stop. And now they have the huge forest fires because they have too much fire fuel. And you look at a forest that's been maintained where the dead branches are real high instead of hanging down. And you can see where a fire goes through, it just singes around the trees, doesn't burn them, but when it goes through, that's why it crowns out.
What do you think changed the rivers, the valley, and your way of life since the early days?
I know what we all thought. Yes, white people. I don't know what else to say. It's since everything changed then when they came in, it's different.
Well, for example, in Wairika, when they did all the hydraulic mining, they washed 2 cubic miles of dirt down the river. That's a lot. Can you imagine 2 cubic miles of dirt? It's gone. In the gold, in the silk, the rivers were never the same after the mining. Then, like Dad said, straightening the rivers. First thing they did was get rid of the Indians. So the culture is not like it was. We can't do our dances. We don't know our language because we were beaten for it. I asked Grandma Mandy to teach me, and her response was, what good would it do you? Because she was beat as a child for speaking her language. So it is changed considerably. We've had to learn a whole new way of life. It was like my Aunt Clara then. She went from horse and buggy to watching the man on the moon.
Yeah, in her lifetime.
So you can imagine what the difference is. I mean, just in my lifetime, we've gone from regular manual typewriters to computers, to supercomputers. The changes are incredible.
What animals do you remember as when you were a child that aren't here now?
Whoa.
I don't know.
I remember seeing a wolf.
Yeah, we did once. Down by Shackleford Creek, we did see a wolf across the road, and he saw her outside, and he stood there and looked at us. Beautiful animal. It was a wolf.
And grizzly bears.
Of course, those aren't around anymore.
The big snakes.
Oh, yes, okay.
All right. You're on.
Okay, when I was a kid, I went with Roy's mom, and it was Roy and Laura and some of his sisters. We all went down. They lived in Orfino, and we went down to the river to gather willows. And Mandy always wore her hair up, in a braid, and I remember her taking that long hair down. She washed her hair in the river. That was neat. But she told us a story about huge snakes used to live along that river, she says, and sometimes they'd be in the dark pools. I never forgot that. I always thought about, I kind of stayed away from those big dark pools because, if you couldn't see down in there, I wouldn't even want to stick my big toe in there. I'd think about those big snakes. And maybe that's why I never did swim in Scott River. Never did.
Maybe.
Other people did, but I never did. I wasn't comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the early 80s, I started doing a lot of interviews with our Indian people.
Mm-hmm.
There was an Indian lady, her name was Agnes Potter. She was in her 80s. 90s. She was very elderly, beautiful Indian woman. And she grew up by, before you get to Coppool Lake, in that vicinity up there. And she told us that way back in the early days, she said there were huge snakes, she says, were in the land. She said they could look down from the road, like toward the river, and she said they'd be lying there sunning themselves. She said they like logs. She said they were huge. And I was real, and I thought about Grandma Mandy's story again, And she said, but they killed them all off every time they come across them. They would shoot them because they were such huge things. Like she said, they were big around. So they were like logs laying down. And then not too long ago, we were talking to another Indian man, and he said at one time a fire came through Quartz Valley here years ago in probably 1920s, because it burned over the mountain and burned through here. And he said down by Blue Pond, they found remains of one of those huge snakes, because he said his family lived down further. They'd come up to look at it. Different people were coming up to look at it. There was word spread about it, and that they had seen that. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Did they make it sound like the snakes were dangerous? I mean, it's...
Well, they were so huge. That's
but
what
they weren't like
I don't know.
rattlers or
I don't
something.
know, but they said they
No,
were
they're
always,
like pythons.
they said they killed them when they came across them. That they killed them.
But they were long too.
Oh, they said they were like logs. Yeah, it's hard to imagine. I thought,
like a
what?
python, a 30-foot python.
Yeah, so they must have been some huge of some kind. I've never seen anything hardly written about that. But Grandma Mandy mentioned that, told us that when we were a kid, and I kind of wondered. And then when Agnes told about it, and she said that they used to shoot them, whenever they came across them. And then to say that one was here by Blue Pond that late.
What changes in rainfall or snowfall have you noticed since the early days?
Not near as much snow anymore. Because when I was a kid, growing up down on the Quartz Valley Reservation, there was always had 5 feet of snow. It would freeze and just stay, for a long time. You don't get that hardly anymore.
Well, Aunt Clara said it was like that in the 1890s. It got there was a drought.
I think, if I'm not sure, but I think that they were talking about the drought back in the end of the century. And that's when they had the big flood there through this country. It washed out lots of families, and they were get built, thought they were on high ground, but they weren't. And that was one of them floods in the 1800s, later part. And there's a few old Nelson. It used to be the barber shoemaker in Fort Jones, Warren Nelson. He had a picture, and I don't know whatever happened to it, but it was taken off that hill there by the old school, the old high school out there.
Yeah.
It was taken off that that point, looking out across where the lumberyard is today. But it was water from that point clear across that thing.
That was in the late 1800s.
I think it was in the late 1800s that happened,
Is that 1898?
probably. But it was in,
Yeah, that was that big.
it was one of them older.
Big Ike's flood?
When she was doing
Big
some,
Ike's flood?
I don't think
Or
it
was
was,
that
earlier.
earlier?
That's early.
she was doing some research and we was reading some of the old diaries, one of them old miners was up on the ridge between McAdams Creek, I think, and Indian Creek. And in this diary he wrote that each day he wrote down it came Thanksgiving, he put Thanksgiving Day no turkey, you know, in his diary. And it was kind of comical to read it. And then it told what the weather was like. It was clear or cloudy and cold. It got up to where it started snowing right after Thanksgiving, and it snowed clear up to into January. It kept snowing. Snow was 5 feet deep up there, and it got more and more. And it started raining it off. And then this warm wind came up and it melted the snow. And I don't know whether that's the same time that flood was or
It
not.
might have been that big flood.
Well, that's good. That sounds like the kind of situation that could have created it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it kind of went together there. So I think it's probably about the same time.
God, that's all your questions.
That's all of them that you have, huh?
Are we excused?
Just wait a minute. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Becca? You want to talk?
The salmon calling ceremony. When they let the first run go through, they had a large ceremony honoring the salmon, thanking the salmon for coming back, and they would sing and dance in the chiefs at the major, whose areas were at the major rivers like the Shasta River, the Scott River, and on up the Klamath River would get the whole village there, and then they would sing and dance. And part of the ceremony was throwing a-posts out into the river for the fish to feed on. And so since it was such an important part, and one of the last salmon calling ceremonies that was documented was out it was along the Shasta River where it makes a big bend going towards Montague, and the people said that it was a war dance, and went and I don't know if they killed him or chased him off, run him off, so they couldn't do the salmon calling ceremony. So not much is left of the salmon calling ceremony. Anytime they got together, they said it was a war party or a war dance. They were either killed or run off.
Do you know when the date might have been of that last documented one?
It was probably early 1860s, late 1850s, early 1850s. So it hasn't been done since then. Roseboro? Poem?
Oh, you tell. You like that story. You tell. You like it.
Rosenborough was an Indian agent. He was in around Wairika. I think that was in 1850s or 60s.
Probably, yeah.
Anyway, this Chief Tolo lived out there close to where that big bend in the river was. And he was talking to Tolo one day, and he told Tolo that, he said, "Why do you eat them crickets?" You know, he said, "They eat horse dung," and he said, "Then you eat them crickets." Tolo says, "Well," he says, "you eat chicken." He says, "Chicken eat cricket, and cricket eat horse dung, and you eat cricket. Eat chicken." So he got back at Roseboro.
That's a good story. That's really cool.
The place out there by Delphic School out into there is called Picket Flat. That's why the name for it. It's mahuta. It's the big, large crickets that used to be there. And I read an article someplace that said they had, I think they used to burn the grass, kind of burn the fields, and it would just sort of toast those crickets, you know, as the fire went through quickly, and they'd gather that up. But they said they saw stacks of crickets out there, like as big as a haystack. I don't know who was doing that, the farmers maybe, or I don't think there were that many Indians around to do it then. But they said there were 2 huge stacks out there, just like haystacks of these black crickets.
So that's another possible type of wildlife or insect
I don't think this is no longer, yeah.
that we don't have here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you notice decreases in just the birds or other animals just that are around that you saw as children?
Well, right now they're not near the birds there were even 10 years ago, around here anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of your plants, you know, that was native to this country, the cows ate them up. They have never came back.
Mm-hmm.
See, they didn't have cattle in, early days till they brought them in.
Mm-hmm.
And then they've eaten lots of the plants we don't have now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I looked and looked to find camas,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd never seen the plant. So I ordered bulbs out of a catalog. Got 5 bulbs and planted them out in the yard, and they grew and bloomed, and I got to see what it looked like. And I've since have found some in a little stream up by Hornbrook. I did see some in the wild there. Then later, an archaeologist from Medford took us out way up Dead Indian Road into this meadow area where there was lots of camas was growing. So that was neat to see. Yeah. And then I couldn't find the apaws either. And then Mary was working with Joanne Mack on an archaeological dig up on the Klamath River. And Joanne said she'd show me an apaws if I wanted to see them. So about 2 years ago, Mary took me up there, and we all got out in the car and went out to a road, the little dusty road we went, and so I stopped and got out. And you could just smell something kind of a little bit sweet scent in the air, you know. And we walked down the road through the trees there, a little brush, and here was quite a large meadow, and it was just white with apaws in bloom. And there was a little breeze blowing, and it was just like waves of this white flower. It was beautiful, just beautiful. There's the picture.
Oh. Shall we get a picture?
Yes. Ooh, oh, this is wonderful.
The girls schemed up on me. They did that poster.
That's great.
But the meadow was about as long the other direction,
Beautiful.
too. We're about in the middle of it. And then, all through that meadow, I think if you were there earlier, it would be blue with camas. Because the camas had dried. You could see the remains of the stems all through that. So if you were there earlier in the spring, it would be just as blue as that is white.
It's beautiful.
That's beautiful.
But I have seen that plant, just a few of them up in Big Meadows, up here in the Marble Mountain Wilderness area. And I can recognize it now because, I know the plant, but I couldn't find it around here except I've seen a few plants up there.
I found a meadow closer. It was,
Did you?
yeah, Iron Gate.
Up
Outside
Iron
of
Gate?
Iron Gate.
But that's what it used to be here in all the meadows and places. It was abundant like that. Out by Wairika, they set up, like on Butch Hill going to Montague, it used to be just thick where they would gather that.
Where do you
They
think that
belong
has
out there.
changed?
What?
Where do you think that's changed?
Why?
Yeah.
From stock.
Yeah.
Probably stock raising over the years. Whatnot,
Plowing
just
up
killed
the
it.
fields.
Well, see, they brought lots of sheep
I
in
guess
here.
in
When
the real early days there was a lot of sheep brought in.
when
and
they
I mean,
first
that
came in
destroyed
here,
a
they
lot of
brought
that.
lots of sheep because they could, get by on less feed than the cattle could. That was the reason why a lot of that stuff was gone. Cattle and sheep go.
I think it would be nice, Betty, if you could show us some of the baskets that are sitting next to you, and we'll
Excuse me.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay.
This basket is a Shasta basket. Someone around by Light Hill Grade vicinity had made this, and I had purchased it from a lady in Fort Jones. So I was just thrilled to, get anything that is a little bit representative of what our people made. And this is an Indian baby basket made by Aunt Clara Wicks. And this is some baskets that were made by some of the Indians that were living up Moffat Creek. They kind of modernized it a little bit, maybe, with putting a little handle on there and different types. So we have some very fine weaving there, and it's very fragile because of its age. And this is a hat. It's not very elaborate because it was more or less a work hat, I meant. Because Indian women wore these. And then when they had their burden basket on their back with the strap would come around, come around here, and that would help, protect. Hold it on. It would help protect too. But it was, but the real elaborate ones they used ceremonies were, more decorative, like the one up there on the wall. So they had many different things like that. So you.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about yours? Or?
You show mine.
I think this is a very, very beautiful basket. It belongs to Mary, and she says it comes from Quartz Valley, and it has a nice design inside where they made that round piece first and used it for the inside because this you could see was the underside of it. They turned it over and used it in there as a base. But that's beautiful. It's just lovely. We don't have a lot of things of Shasta because of such an impact was made on our people with the genocide, and then all the villages were burned, destroyed. But each family seemed to have a little something they were able to keep. And so I have gone around to the different families and photographed a lot of their artifacts and what basket things have, to just now pulling it together to see what some of the designs were and some of the things. So I'm getting it piece by piece as we do this.
Would you show us the picture of your Aunt Clara, too?
Can you see that? I don't remember now.
Yeah.
This is a pencil sketch of my great aunt Clara Wicks, and it was done by Terry Naylor in Etna, and it's just exactly like Aunt Clara. I think it's a perfect sketch. It's just beautiful. Okay. Aunt Clara was born in 1879, and she died in 1979.
And she was known for her basket weaving? Or was it?
She didn't do much basket making in her later years. I spent a lot of time with her gathering plants and things as a child, so that's what kind of got me started with it. I've expanded on it since. But she just couldn't wait for spring to get the mustard greens, just for eating, and we'd go get it for her. And she liked watercress. She especially liked watercress. So we gathered with her more with plants and things, and gathering the plums when there were berries, picking, and things like that. I spent a lot of time with her doing that.
I have a question for either of you. Is basket making still very much alive?
I think Mary's the only one who makes baskets.
Two of us.
There's
Aunt Jim.
Oh, yes, Roy's sister.
Wow. So it's not actively being passed on to the next generation?
There was no one to teach her. Now Grandma Mandy's gone, but she did get start from her, which takes practice and practice.
Well, it's not just the practice. What is really hard and difficult now is gathering the materials. You can't, like I was telling her about my willow picking areas, you can't depend on them anymore. Then the drought with the bug infestation, so there's a little, and the ferns you can't get anymore. Private property is the biggest problem. I figured someday I'll probably get shot trying to go pick willows because people don't like you on their property and they don't ask questions. So I've taught one of my nieces. But I never really started weaving until I got older, out of college. And she's still young, and I figured there's still time. You know? And I have a lot more nieces growing up. And I can still teach my sisters. So it's, I think it'll start growing. More people. And I teach them just like Grandma taught me. Go get your willows. And non-Indians have asked me if I teach them. I go, yeah, go get your willows. I've not taught any of them yet. You know, you can go pick a big bundle like this, and you end up with a bundle like this after you get all the bark and leaves off of it. Then you have to size it, and you got a whole bunch of bundles like this. And so it takes, you know, you can pick and strip a big bundle by yourself about this big, I figure. That's all day. And you gotta go do that day after day after day after day for like a month when the sap is running. Because you can't just go to the store and buy it. So it's a lot of work just to get to the point to weave. And then if you're going to weave colors, it's even that much more work.
Come on in.
I don't know. I've been starting to sell baskets. I sold an acorn leaching basket, a baby basket, and a rattle yesterday. And I go to museums and I look at them and I go home and make them. That's how I started making rattles like that.
Want to show that?
That's a rattle? Oh, neat.
Like that, and then I just put shells that's got barnacles in it. When I go to Santa Cruz every Thanksgiving, and I pick up shells on the beach and put them in my rattle. So and now I do pine nuts. We went down and gathered pine nuts down by Redding, north of Redding. And so whatever you find, you put in there. So
Tell her how Grandma Mandy critiqued your first basket.
when Grandma taught me to make baskets, she sat there and she started weaving. And I watched, she'd hand it to me, and I'd work till I made a mistake. She'd take it back, fix it, weave it a little bit more, and we worked back and forth like that till we finished the basket. Not once did she say, this is how you made it.
Or you don't do that.
Or she never criticized me or told me I did anything wrong in making the basket. But I really had to pay attention to what she was doing. And the whole time she was talking about her grandma, who taught her to make baskets. And Sissy was born before white man got here, so there's that connection from granddaughter to granddaughter's granddaughter through the centuries. And when she was, she said she was a little girl, probably around 9, 10 years old, she would go with Sissy, and they would do a 3-month trek around Scott Valley, gathering. Grandma would carry the pots and pans, and Sissy carried everything else. Getting, mainly what Sissy wanted was things that you couldn't get any other time of the year. She knew when to be there and where to pick it and gather it, the medicines and special herbs that only grow in certain ecosystems. So they knew the seasons, they knew where things grew, when to go pick them at their peak, how to prepare them, because they had to take everything to prepare them, to preserve what was in the medicines and stuff. And that's what she talked about when she taught me to make baskets. So I went home and I made my first basket, and I went and showed it to her, and she looks at it, and she hands it back to me, and she goes, just don't store beans in it. At the center, I had started it too big, and there was holes. And if I stored beans in it, they would fall through the hole. And that's how she told me. There was nothing wrong with the basket. You know, even though I started it wrong, she never told me it was wrong. She just told me what not to store in it. And it was
What
great.
a wonderful way to teach.
And that's how they taught children,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And
No
but
judgment.
no, no, and it's just absolutely incredible when you think you could grow up in a society like that. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. It's like I have a hard time understanding what people do and how they think these days. It's just like, why do you want to do that? You know, right's right, wrong's wrong, and that's stupid. And so it was really neat to have them talk.
When they made that 3-month trek, they camped then that whole time.
Oh yeah, they walked the whole way, all the way around the
And
valley.
they must have had some kind of hide packs or something, or
Probably.
yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, burden baskets. It'd be incredible what you could put in there. I want to make me one this winter. So when I go work out in the archaeological field school next year, I can really blow them away.
Wouldn't it be wonderful to make a movie of that? I mean, it doesn't look like it looks in, so it's hard to think of it, but I can just imagine how beautiful that would be as a movie if you ever have a chance.
And you
to
could
do
find
it.
places, I'm sure. If
You think so?
Oh, yeah, sure you could.
Oh,
You could find places.
Oh yeah, it's just
Yeah.
the camera angle. I mean, if you want to, you know, like along the river, I mean, you could get into places along the Scott River that would look like it was never destroyed. You know, just with your angles and not have any houses or anything. There's a spot right back up here where you can look down the valley and not see a house.
It's my favorite place.
You
My
know,
favorite
so
spot.
you'd have to look for the places to get your shots, but you could still do it.
it's a beautiful story.
Yeah,
You a general question when she turned that on, but then you could expand on that and say whatever you want. And
Mary, I need a shot of you because I don't have any. I
Oh.
have your voice an awful lot.
Okay.
And then no shot of you.
Okay.
Sit over there.
So. Okay.
Smile.
Yeah, gonna put me on the spot now, huh?
Okay, whenever you're ready.
I helped them kids.
Roy, I was hoping you could tell us something about the logging that you did in the early days and maybe how you got into it and what areas you logged, what those areas looked like before, how they look today. Just some information about that aspect of our watershed.
Well, when I first started logging, I went to Happy Camp in the mill, and then we worked a little bit outside of that. But down there, they had big timber, not like it is today. You know, most of it's gone. But when I came out here, when I came back, I drove for Johnny Evans in hauled logs out of the valley here, just around the flat. Then I got a job with Doug Eastwick when he had the mill in Fort Jones, and I drove logging trucks for him. And we logged Patterson Creek, Crystal Creek, and they built that road into Lover's Camp up from Scott River Road up past Boulder Creek and on up into up on top Box Camp Mountain. And that was all timber that never had a road into. It was all virgin timber and then at that time. And then I quit them when I went to work for International Paper, and they just started the job down there by Chagrin. And I fell right away on the road with the road crew. We started right down there at Chagrin Bridge, and we built the road clear up underneath the big meadows. And that was the first logging was done in that area.
What year would that have been?
I started in 1960. And then I worked for them up to 82. When they shut down. And we logged all over the country. We worked Horse Creek and Trinity and out by Medicine Lake, and down by Salt Creek, and over by Tennant and Horse Creek and Miller Mountain and Gooseneck. We logged all over with IP. But they're not near the timber left now that there was then. All the big timber is gone. So
When you mean big, like
big timber, the bigger stuff. But now you hardly ever find anything over, if you go out and cut now, you hardly find anything over 2 feet in diameter. When Bobby and Evans and I was logging together this last year, we cut down by Carl Harris's there. And we cut that timber, hauled logs out of there in the first part of the 50s when they logged that. And we went back in and logged it again. And there were some trees, about that big there, about 20 inches. So it's all going now.
What do you think about the differences in logging practices over the years? And you just mentioned you were able to come back into this one area 40 years later. So obviously that had been cut maybe a little bit differently. What are your thoughts on that?
When they first cut that, they didn't take, they had more timber than days. And this kind of timber, they want bigger trees. So they didn't take anything that you could reach around, at breast high. And that's the way they judged it. If you couldn't reach around it, then you could cut it. But if you reach around it, they didn't cut it. And today, they take stuff down pretty small, and there's not much left. And where her dad logged up Doozle Creek, and where long goats come in there back it was in the 50s. And the national paper put a road in there in the first part of the 80s, and they logged that, and there were some pretty nice trees in there then. But they're doing it different now. I don't know how the outcome is going to be again in another that length of time. It probably won't be near as big.
Did you ever have any thoughts about the practice of clear cutting, which I know was used somewhat on
clear cutting to me is like the fire went through Kidder Creek, it went through in 55, and here it is 95, and there's nothing grows back up there on it, on the south side of Kidder Creek. They planted it right after the fire, they seeded it by air, and they went back and they seeded it again, and nothing's ever taken on that steep hillside, because there's nothing there, and I think it just burns up too hot, no coverage on it. When Joe Skillen and I was cutting up on Ball Mountain for IP, and that was in the 70s, I think it was. We stopped to eat lunch, and I told Joe, I said, I've been looking at the country there, that we've cut nice pines, some of it 4 foot, 5 foot through, going down to about 3 foot, but there was none too big in there. Mostly all big timber. But there were lots of brush that died, and it was about 3-4 inches thick. Big long brush pieces that was dead and fell over. And I got to talking to him about it, and I said, looked like to me that one time this was a brush field. And he said he went to school, I guess, for a botanist or something. And anyway, he said, well, what happened in it, he said, he'd been looking at it too, that when that brush these trees grew up in that brush. They grew through that brush, and when they got big enough, they drowned out the brush. And so these trees were all growed up through all that brush in there. The whole country up there, must have been 10, 12 acres up there, was all like that, all in that one spot. So, I don't know, now I don't know what's going to happen when they go out and they take all the vegetation off, and then they plant them little trees. They have no shade, they have nothing, and they dry out, and they don't seem to grow. A lot of places they don't.
Do you see a value in the way it used to look here with the great numbers of trees that we had? Do you think that was important to just the general environment or ecosystem here, or do you feel like what has happened with the amount of logging and such that we've done here, that that impact can be restored, and or what do you think about that?
Well, in places where there were lots of trees, lots of timber, the brush has grown up so high it's not even deer feed anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it don't even benefit anything from it, and there's nothing coming up through it. There's no new trees coming. I don't know how they're gonna go back and replant that. It seemed like to me if they'd go back and plant new trees under the brush and have it grow up through it, even trim the brush back, they'd have a better chance of growing than it would be if they cleaned it all off and started over again. Just by, looking at it. But the brush is grown up now so that there's not even deer feed in it. There's all big stuff on the bottom, and they can't reach anything to eat.
Do you think that we've gotten smarter or dumber about how we take care of things?
Well, we got to talking to, I talked to the soil conservation guy here the other day, and it's on the same deal about the rivers and how the rivers have been taken care of. And my idea of the rivers was that when they went in there and they built up all these banks and everything, they caused all the water to go in one place, which causes a greater force to it. But if they would let it, when it got high, spread out on its own, they wouldn't have the problem of washing as they do now, I wouldn't think. But then they want the farmland, so I guess that's what they do. What was the other question?
Well, I just said, do you think we're smarter or dumber than, say, the Indian people who lived here and they managed in a certain way, and then people who came after them managed kind of in a different way, and now we're trying to look at what we have and do something with it. I mean,
well, looking at it now, as the way it's what's happening, we've got the drought, we have all the bugs and everything, but I think what's happened is they've left the fire part of the system out, and I think the fire was the main part of it. I think the fire burnt, got rid of a lot of the undergrowth and bugs, and they didn't have no place to hatch them, and now they're so far behind, I don't know how they're going to catch up. Because Mother Nature had its own way of taking care of it. They'd start the fires on the ridges and they'd all burn down the hill, from lightning storm. And it didn't get that big fuel pack on it. And it usually did it every year, they just let it burn. Then they start putting them out. Well, they got this under. So now they're talking about underburning, going through an underburning and all that. So it'll probably work if it ever gets done. But I think they were pretty dumb to start with, and they're protecting the forest by not using more fire.
this is kind of a difficult question, perhaps, or a controversial question, but you still log, right?
Yeah.
You're still a logger, and of course there's a lot of talk about, well, we don't really have very many trees left, but we still have a number of loggers who want to be in business. How do you see that working out? Do you see that we can balance that so that trees can still be cut, or are we down so low we can't cut anymore, or?
You can't fool anybody anymore, because I've seen this mountain up here when it was before it was logged. There's nothing up there now much after they've got through with it, because you're not going to log like you did a long time ago. You're going to have to do something else, but you can't quit logging because there's still going to be dying trees. You can't let them go to waste, otherwise you're being wasteful. But I think we've got too many laws that the state has imposed on loggers, which I guess you can't control everybody. There's always somebody trying to beat the law, and you have the same thing that's in logging. But if they did it right, I think it would still be a good, because it's been logged before, and we went back and logged again. It's still had a lot of good timber on it. But I do believe that this last go around, what they've been doing, like fruit growers did up here, it's going to be a very long time when they go back in there again.
So we're needing to talk probably about how do we log sustainably from here on in, so that we can keep some trees continuing to grow and take out some selectively.
Yeah, because you can go up before you get to the big meadows up there. You can look across just below that last ridge going into back meadows where fruit growers logged that off. There's hardly nothing left up there anymore. And I think something like that should never happen. And but I don't know.
Do you think that kind of logging has impacted down here in the valley?
I think it does. One thing about it is that when it snows up there, there's nothing to shade the snow, and it does nothing to hold it up there. It runs off and it's gone. And then so I think you end up with less water at the end of the year. You might have more after time runs off, but you don't have it all year long. They do use a lot of water, but I think the whole hill burns up. It gets hotter because there's no shade.
And we certainly have less water these days, don't we?
I've been looking at it. Of course, I've talked to quite a few people. We've been working different places, and we worked up on the Siskiyous up there and worked for the outfit that bought all the railroad property. They're from down around Brady. SWF. I talked to the forester up there, and the way he explained it and everything, he says, he said, and I asked him about, what he thought, what he thought about cutting all that big timber, because we went back in there. The railroad did a pretty good job managing their timber. They would go in there and they mark all the skid roads and they mark all the timber. They only took out what they needed. And because they didn't need the money either, but they had to manage the timber. So when they got up there, when SWF bought it, well, they had a lot of big timber in there. We went in there and cut a lot of it out of there. And I asked him about it, and he says, it seems like when you take away all this vegetation and get your balance changed, your weather changes. So I don't know whether it is anything to it or not, but it seems to.
Well, look, there's still no snow on Mount Shasta. Hardly any at all.
Not the great amount anyway.
If we were to think about the Indian way of harvesting the forests today, could somebody talk about what that might be?
Well, see, the Indians didn't harvest the forest. They just used it for their, because they didn't go out and cut timber like they do now. They didn't have the reason for it. So you can't hardly compare that part where the Indians had it as it is today. Everything's changed.
They didn't harvest, they maintained
Yeah.
the forest. If every person went and took care and maintained what they needed, if you couldn't go to the store, you had to grow everything, people would have a lot more concern with how their neighbor was growing, if they were polluting. That's how the Indians were. They all took care of each other because they were taking care of themselves and the land they were living on for the 7th generation. Nobody today manages anything for the seventh generation. It's all managed on greed, power, and the whole value system is different. The Shastas use gold for jewelry, but not for money. It's valued. What they valued was their children. You know, that was their ultimate treasure, their children, because it meant continuation. And to maintain everything for the seventh generation, you know, they had to make sure they took care of it properly. And when they went harvesting, it was harvesting the plums, the fruit, not the plant. You know, you pruned it back. Like when you watch animals, wild animals, not domesticated animals, they take a bite here, they take a bite here, they take a bite here. You know, they're not in one area just munching, unless it's berries. So, you know, you watch deer eat out in the field. They're continually walking. You know, they don't eat in one place. So they're pick here. And things have a chance to grow back because it's not all mowed down like sheep did. So the value systems are so different, you can't compare them.
Yeah, like, with the, you see the Indians had bow and arrows and they didn't have guns because they could never hunt to get any animal extinct anyway, you know, because they didn't have the tools for it. But I forget who was telling the story about that up there in the Siskiyou. I think Sergeant Sambo told Selby up there in the Siskiyou in the fall of the year when the geese used to migrate out of Oregon. They come through them low gaps, and the Indians would wait on the other side. They'd throw sticks up when they come through, and they'd break their wings, and then they'd go down and then they had people down in their kitchen when they come through the gap. And you could never get anything extinct by harvesting that way. You know, you just lucky if you got them all.
Well, it seems like there's something to learn from that.
Yeah, and then he said Sergeant Sambo told him that when they first came into Selby was around horse country quite a bit, and Klamath River, and then the Sergeant Sambo was down there, and he said when Indians used to get pine nuts, they'd go out where the squirrels were cutting them off the tree, and then they'd gather them, but they wouldn't take them all. They'd leave a few for the squirrels. So the squirrels wouldn't leave. And then, but when the white man came in, then they harvested to cut the tree down. So there was none next year.
That's extinction, right?
Yeah.
In a real sense.
And that kind of, you know, to Sergeant Sambo, he couldn't figure it out. Because he'd been there all them years, and they did the same method all the time, you know. Let the squirrels cut them off, and then you helped them harvest it. But when they cut the tree down, there was nothing left. Sergeant Sambo was the old Indian. Was he from Oregon or
Rogue River.
Rogue River?
He moved on south. He's the last full-blood Shasta Indian.
The last full.
Yeah. He died in 1968, I believe. 60s anyway.